everyone, I'm Scyntha and welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to be making my famous fried rice. It's one of my favorites, my friends always ask for it, and bring an appetite because it's quite delicious. I'm going to talk a little bit about the kernels of rice. I like to use short grain rice in my recipe just because it's got a good texture. It stays together, it's a little bit more sticky, and because of the high content of starch in it is the reason that it kind of holds together a lot more. Actually a lot more than the long grain varieties. So that's why I like to use it in my recipes. And this is also the favorite of people who make sushi as well as other kinds of Asian foods. So I like this kind of rice. I do use long grain rice, but I don't use it for any of my Asian cooking. I save that for other kinds of recipes, which I'm sure I'll feature on this channel at some point. So to get started making the fried rice, we're gonna have to make the rice. I like to use a rice cooker when I make my rice just because it's a little bit more consistent and because I can put it in the pot and I can let it do its thing while I'm making the other ingredients of the recipe. It saves me a little bit of time instead of having to watch over a pot boiling on the stove. I also like it because no matter what, if I put the same amount of grain and the same amount of water in it, it's gonna come out perfect every time. And it's not gonna spill all over my stove. If you're using a rice cooker, you're gonna go ahead and use about 4 of these. These are not actually 1 cup measurements. This is actually only about 3/4 of a cup of rice grain. So when you make 3/4 of a cup of rice, dry rice, it makes about 1 cup cooked rice. I'm gonna want 4 3/4 cups of dry rice into my pot, and then I'm gonna rinse it. Now that I have about 4 of the 3/4 cup scoopers worth of rice in here, I'm gonna go ahead and rinse it. I like to rinse it with cold water because if you rinse it with hot water, sometimes it gets the cooking process going, and we want it to really not start cooking until it gets into the pot. So we're just gonna give it a quick little rinse and rinse some of the starch out. But we don't want all of the starch out, so we're only gonna rinse it 1 time. That starch is gonna help the rice hold together in the fried rice recipe. If you can see right here in the pot, there is a little bit of a marking on top of it, and it has numbers up the side. And since we put 4 of the 3/4 cup in, we wanna fill the water line up to right below the number 4 here, and that will give us the right amount of water. Also, when we fill the pot with water, another way that you can know how much water you have in your pot, especially if you don't have markings on the side of your rice cooker, is to use the knuckle test. So basically you're going to make sure the rice is kind of flat in the pot like this. You're gonna take your finger and hold it up the top of the rice line like this, and you're gonna fill the water up to your first knuckle. And that's how you'll know how much rice to make. That's the same amount for no matter how much dry rice is inside of your pot. So we're gonna go ahead and fill up our pot with water right now. Okay, and I'm just gonna give it a little swish, make sure there's no air pockets in there, and I'm gonna make sure that the top of the rice is nice and flat. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my knuckle in and see it's right, I don't know if you can see that, it's about right at my knuckle. Right there. So that's how I know how much water is in there, and I have just the right amount, so I'm gonna go ahead and put it in my rice cooker. Okay, so the water line is just below the number 4 on my pot there, if you can see that. All right, and I'm gonna throw that in here. I'm gonna close the lid, turn it on, and press the white rice button. And while that cooks, I'm going to go ahead and start my eggs and preparing the meats and onions and start getting that cooked up, so that way when this rice is ready, my ingredients are ready and I can go ahead and throw everything together. So these are the different kinds of meats that I normally put in my fried rice. But you can use any kind of meats that equal to about 12 ounces worth of meat. So just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You can really use any combination of meats. Right here I have regular Spam, bacon Spam, Andouille, Portuguese sausage, which I can only find in Hawaii when one of my friends sends me some. So I'm not going to be using that today, just because I like to keep that for special occasions. You can also use things like diced ham or bacon or sausage or any kind of combination, but today I'm going to be using Spam, and I'm also going to be using the Andouille sausage. So I'm going to chop that up. We'll get started making the fried rice. Okay, and then I'm going to just add this to my bowl of other meats here. So that looks about how much we'll need for today. So for this recipe, I'm going to need about 5 large eggs. So I'm going to go ahead and crack them into this bowl. I'm going to add a splash of milk, some pepper, some salt. I'm going to take a fork and whisk it up. You want to make sure that you get a lot of air into your eggs so that way they can be nice and fluffy. Those look pretty good mixed. Let's move over to the pan and cook up the eggs. So here are the ingredients we need for the fried rice. I've got the meats that we diced up, about half of a white onion here. We've got the egg mixture that we made, salt, pepper, hoisin. This is my favorite brand of gluten-free hoisin just because I think it tastes the closest to the non-gluten-free version. I've got some minced garlic, some avocado oil. You can use any kind of oil you want. Avocado is just my preference. Then also I have Kikkoman tamari soy sauce. You can also get the gluten-free Kikkoman soy sauce, but essentially gluten-free soy sauce is the same thing as tamari. Tamari is just soy sauce that is made traditionally without the wheat put into it. You can use either one, but Kikkoman is my favorite brand of soy sauce just because I think it's the closest to original soy sauce that I like from before I went gluten-free. You can use any kind of soy sauce though. I have some green onions here. What I like to do is chop the green onions and then I rinse them. I put them in a Ziploc freezer bag and store them in the freezer so that way when I'm cooking they're ready to go and I don't have to worry about taking the time to cut them up. I can just pop them right in the pan frozen. I don't even have to let them thaw. We're gonna turn our skillet on to about medium heat and we're gonna throw in about a tablespoon of butter into the pan and let it melt. This is going to be the skillet that we're gonna be using to make our eggs. This other skillet over here we're gonna be using to make the actual fried rice. We're going to let this butter melt in the pan for the fried rice and add our onion. We're gonna add in our meats. We're gonna add a little pepper, a little salt. Just add enough salt and pepper to whatever your taste preference is. So now that our butter is getting pretty melted, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it around in the pan just to get the pan completely coated. Okay, and I'm gonna need a rubber spatula for the eggs. I'm gonna go ahead and give the eggs another little stir stir and fluff them up just one more time before I put them in the pan. Okay, and now that this is nice and hot, we're gonna go ahead and pour the eggs in. Okay, so now that the eggs are in, we're gonna go ahead and just stir around and a little bit through, just kind of folding the eggs so that way they stay nice and fluffy. Over here, while we have our salt, pepper, onion, and our sausage, we're gonna go ahead and add a little bit of oil, just enough to coat it, just like that. Not any exact amount. We're gonna turn that on to about a medium-high heat, and we're gonna let this sizzle up and brown. Make sure you get another bowl ready to transfer this into, so that way we can use this pan to make our fried rice in. Okay, so we're going to continue with the eggs here. Okay, you want to cook the eggs thoroughly just until the liquid is pretty much gone from them. You do want to cook eggs thoroughly or you can get sick. Okay, so that looks about good for the eggs. I'm going to turn the heat off and I'm going to put them on the back burner until we need them a little bit later. Okay, so now we're going to go over here to our meat mixture. I'm going to give it a stir while it heats up and it fries. Starting to smell good already. You don't want to stir this constantly. You want to kind of let it brown and just stir it every once in a while just to kind of get it going. But you don't want to constantly stir it. You actually want to let the meat and the onions kind of sit on the hot pan and get nice and golden brown. I'm doing the eggs and the meat and onions separate, but when you do it at home, you can kind of do them at the same time. I just did it separately so that way we can kind of focus on each pan, and so that way you can kind of see a little bit more about how I do it. Okay, so it's looking pretty good here. You see how the meat is kind of getting that crispy brown on it. It's not quite done though. We're gonna give it a little stir and let it cook for just a bit longer. We want it all to be nice and incorporated. And don't worry about if some of the bits look a little burnt. They'll kind of soften up a little bit as we stir all the other things into it. You just want it to get nice and brown for right now. When we add the liquid to our rice and to the actual fried rice when we're making it, the crispy bits won't be hard in our rice. It'll kind of mellow out the dish. But we want that flavor in there right now. So we're gonna go ahead and make sure and cook it until it's nice and crispy brown. So while the meat is browning, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this recipe. This recipe is one of my own. It's something that I made it my passion to be able to make, just because when I was diagnosed with my wheat allergy, it was the number one thing that I missed being able to eat, just because there's not a whole lot of Asian foods or even foods from Hawaii that you can eat that don't incorporate soy sauce. So I tried really hard at working with this recipe so that way it could be the version, or at least the closest to the version of the fried rice that I remember eating in Hawaii growing up. Breakfast fried rice is what I call this, just because we eat this for breakfast a lot. It's got the eggs and the sausage and all of that incorporated into it. But that doesn't mean that you can't eat fried rice at different times of the day. When I moved to the mainland, a lot of my friends were confused when I was eating fried rice for breakfast. When I made this for them, I had to explain to them, you know, in Hawaii, we eat breakfast fried rice. And then there's also the fried rice that you eat with Chinese cooking. And then there's the fried rice that you can eat for dinner that may have a little bit more of hearty meats in it, such as like steak. There's all different kinds of fried rice that you can make. You can really just play with the recipe and make it your own. Add so many different ingredients into it to make it different every time. And that's why this is one of my favorite recipes. Towards the end of the cooking, you'll start to hear that popping sound, and normally that just means that it's getting pretty hot and you might have to stir it a little bit more frequently just to keep it going and to keep it from burning. But right now, all of the sides of each piece of meat look pretty cooked and pretty browned. So I'm gonna go ahead and transfer this to a bowl and turn the heat down on my stove to about low, just until we get all of the other ingredients in our pan for the next step. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and set this off on the side. Now we've got our hot pan and we're turned down to low. We're gonna use the same pan because the oils and flavors that we just created by making the onions and the meats, we want that to stay in our fried rice. What we're gonna do is we're gonna add a little bit more oil, not too much though, but mainly just enough to get the rice to not stick to the bottom of the pan. Okay, and now we're gonna scoop our rice out that we just cooked and should be finished cooking at this point. If it's not, I would just go ahead and take a break, turn your stove off, wait for your rice to cook, and then when it's done cooking, you can go ahead and turn your pan back on and you can start it. You can also make the eggs and the meat mixture the day before or a couple of days before, but I wouldn't really go too much longer than that just because of the quality of the eggs might go down, especially if you're wanting to make this right before school or right before work. You can go ahead and make these ingredients and put them in your refrigerator just so that way they'll be ready to go when you are actually ready to make your rice. We have our cooked rice here. It's nice and fluffy, and this is the medium grain I was talking about. I'm gonna take my rice scooper and I'm gonna put it right into the pan. You'll hear a little sizzle, but don't worry. And just go ahead and throw it right in. There's no real way to mess up fried rice as far as how many ingredients you put in the pan, and how much meat do you use, or how much eggs do you use, or how much rice do I throw in here. It's really all preference, and that's why I love fried rice. There's so much versatility to it, and you can add any ingredients you have left over. Like, say I had hamburgers last night and I want to make fried rice this morning. Well, I just cut up my hamburger patties that have been in the fridge all night and I throw that in there too. I'm going to give it a little bit more salt, a little bit more pepper, a little bit of the hoisin. About a tablespoon, I would say. But again, you don't really have to be too accurate on this. I'm going to add my soy sauce. I want to cover the rice with it. But I also want to leave a little bit of rice open just so that way it can not be too overpowering of a salty flavor. I like garlic, so I put a lot in my fried rice. I put about this much, which is about, I want to say, a heaping tablespoon, but really you can add as little or as much as you want. Then I'm going to add my frozen, but kind of thawed now, green onions that I had prepped before. I'm also going to add a little bit of water just to kind of get it sizzling and cooking in there. Alright, now I'm going to just stir it up. And I'm going to turn the heat up to about medium-high. And to be able to make the fried rice with rice that's not freshly made, you'll do the same thing. Throw the rice in, throw all the ingredients just like we did. But instead of adding only a couple of tablespoons of water, you're going to want to add a lot more, almost up to a cup. But you're going to want to do it gradually so that way you don't put too much water in. If you put too much water in, it'll become a little bit too mushy. And the joy of this too is that if you've added too much soy sauce to it, you can always add a little bit more of the white rice that you have left over in your pot. Just add a little bit more and it'll spread that flavor around and it'll become a little less salty. I can already tell it's going to be salty if I hadn't put the white rice in, just because of how dark the rice kernels are. And it looks like my rice is getting a little hard to stir. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add a touch more water. Just a little bit. And then I'm just going to stir it around until all of the rice kernels are coated and incorporated. Okay, so I don't know if you can tell, but the rice is kind of getting a little hard to stir, almost like it's got a heavy feeling. So that means that it's lacking oil. And so what we're going to do is we're gonna add our meat mixture in, which already has a lot of oil in it. And when we put that in, it's going to loosen up the rice kernels and kind of separate them a little bit. So we'll go ahead and slowly stir that in. See, it's already starting to stir a lot better than it was before. Okay, so now that that's pretty incorporated and stirred, this is about the color that you want it to be, a nice golden brown, and that means it's time to throw in our eggs. So what we're gonna do is just fold them right in. And you better call your kids to the table or your family because breakfast is about to be ready. And the best way to eat this is fresh from the pan. So you're just gonna kind of fold the eggs in a bit, and there you go. It's time to serve it up. You can also add a little bit more green onion to garnish it, but I'm gonna go ahead and plate this up for you guys and show you what it can look like on the plate. Thanks for watching this episode on breakfast fried rice. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you're excited to get into the kitchen and see what kind of fried rice you can come up with. If you like this video, make sure you click the like button and subscribe to my channel so that way you can be notified anytime I make another video. I'm hoping to get at least one video out a week. I'd love to feature a recipe if you're looking for something and can't find how to do it yourself. So please drop that below in the comments for me as well. I hope you enjoyed this just as much as I enjoyed cooking it for you. I'll see you guys later.